So yeah, today we're starting second half of the course. Pretty exciting stuff. Before we start the second half of the course, you guys should for Wittgenstein, who I know is slacking on the homework, which is most of you who haven't been doing the homework. Try to do past homeworks if you can, and definitely start doing homeworks with Stoicism. All right, it'll help you learn philosophy, it'll help you learn English, make you a better person. So yeah, everyone, start doing the homework, even though it's hard. Okay, so yeah, I am going to now start PowerPoint. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? All right. Awesome. So let's start with Stoicism. So as always, outline. Why are we talking about the Stoics? History. What is the history of the Stoics? Historical background. What are the historical influences that influence the Stoics? Yeah. What did the Stoics believe? What influenced what they believed? How did they argue? All right. So starting off, introduction. So we finished how to think, ending with Popper in the 20th century, which means we have to go from the modern day, from today, or more or less today, all the way back to ancient Greece, where everything always starts. So this section begins how to live. This is a different sort of philosophy. So logic and consistency are still very important, and we'll still cover that. We'll still talk about the logic and the consistency. The relation to the real world changes. So on the one hand, it matters less because we're talking about how things should be rather than how they are. So it matters less because it's how it should be rather than how it is. But it matters more because it matters, can it be implemented? How to live only matters if you can actually live it. Now, that's not a statement that everyone would agree with. Some people disagree with me, and we'll cover a bunch of philosophers, and you can decide for yourself whether you think that's true. But it is something to think about. So how to live, how things should be versus how they are, but also, can people actually live this way? Is it a possible moral philosophy? So our first moral system that we'll cover is the Stoics. It was an incredibly popular moral philosophy during its time, and has recently experienced a resurgence. So in the 20th and 21st century, it's suddenly become very popular again. There's some very popular books in America talking about how to live like a Stoic. You may even find you want to follow it yourself. It's up to you. I'll explain the philosophy. It is up to you how you live. All right. So introduction. Stoicism was an incredibly popular moral philosophy during the times of the Greeks and Romans, and is also growing increasingly popular now. So let's talk about history of the Stoics. So Stoicism as a philosophy goes from 300 BC to 529 AD, reaching its peak influence around 200 AD when it was one of the most popular philosophies in Rome. So it lasted for 800 years. So that means it's really hard to summarize it, right? It changed, it evolved. Earlier Stoics aren't the same thing as late Stoics. Adding to the difficulties, the only writers that we have in full are the late Roman Stoics. So all of our information about the early Greek Stoics, or most of it rather, we get from the Romans. So that's even more complicated. We don't have enough information about the start of Stoicism. So with that being said, keeping in mind that we lack some amount of knowledge and that we're talking about 800 years of history, let's start with the beginning of the Stoics. So Stoicism was started by Zeno the Phoenician, and Zeno was a pretty popular name, so this isn't the same guy as Zeno's paradoxes. Zeno the Phoenician in about 300 BC, he took inspiration from the Cynics, who we'll discuss, Plato and Socrates. He was still an original thinker. And this is Zeno himself. He honestly just looks like another ancient Greek guy. So, during Zeno's life, Stoicism became a popular Greek philosophy. After his death, it continued to gain popularity, and Stoics used their influence to raise a statue to Zeno in Athens, which is this statue here. Well, this is a copy of that statue, how we know what he looks like. So, by 86 BC, well, one of the reasons it was so popular is that Stoics believed in public preaching. So they would not just talk to each other, but shout out to the public. The word Stoic actually comes from stoapokile. Sorry, my Greek isn't very good, but that's the porch at the agora at the marketplace from which Zeno used to preach. So they actually take their name from the fact that they would shout out from a local porch. All right, by 86 BC, Romans had become very interested in Greek philosophy. So 300 BC to 86 BC, so about 200 years, Romans had become very interested in Greek philosophy, and it was pretty common for well-off Romans to come to Greece and study. Stoicism became the leading philosophy among the political set. So if you were a highly educated, well-off Roman, and you were interested in politics, you'd probably be a Stoic. So the Romans had Stoic philosophers themselves: Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius. So 1 AD, 65 AD, 50 AD to 135 AD, 121 AD to 180 AD. So Seneca, he was a political advisor to Nero, who, if you know anything about Roman history, Nero is a very infamous Roman emperor. He was pretty terrible. So it's interesting that Seneca was a advisor to him as a Stoic. We'll discuss that. We had Epictetus, who was a former slave, and Marcus Aurelius, who was an emperor. So it's a really interesting mix for the three most famous: advisor, slave, emperor. So their writings are where our information about Stoicism comes from, including the ancient Greek Stoics. All right, so Stoicism ends in 529 AD, when all pagan philosophies are banned by Justinian, the Byzantine emperor. However, the teachings are incorporated into later philosophies, including Christian philosophies, and also experience a revival in the modern era. So now people today, they still study and read Stoicism. Bill Clinton, who's a man presumably that you recognize because he's a former president of the United States. His wife is probably going to be the next president of the United States. So he lists Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, his favorite book. So this guy's book is Bill Clinton's favorite book. I don't know if this is actually Meditations. It's probably not. I'm pretty sure I just found a random picture of Bill Clinton holding up a book. Okay, so history. Stoicism started in Greece in 329 BC, went global because the Romans, was banned in 529 AD. So, Daja Chinchulama.我的中文说清楚了吗？ thank you. All right. So let's discuss historical background. What were the more and more native? Probably not. But what were the historical forces that influenced the Stoics? So again, there's a lot to cover over the entire history of Stoicism. It's 800 years, even if we limit ourselves to just Greece or Rome. So to save on time, I think the real interesting question about Stoicism is how a philosophy started in Greece ends up being not only followed, but also continued by a Roman emperor, right? They're two different countries, Greece and Rome. They have different traditions, right? So why is it that some philosophy started in Greece ends up being written about by a Roman emperor? So let's talk about the influence of Greek philosophy on Roman thought. So the first real contact the Romans had with Greek philosophy was in 155 BC. So the Greeks sent 3 philosophers to Rome to appeal a fine of 100 talents, 2,600 kilograms of silver. That's a serious amount of silver. So the Romans could do that because they had military domination over Greece, but that's a huge amount of money. So the philosophers were a Stoic, a skeptic, and a peripatetic. Skeptics are, we've sort of discussed Greek philosophy that doesn't believe in anything. Peripatetics are a follower of Aristotle. So this story is actually pretty great, so I'll tell you guys. So the skeptic, skeptics generally distrust everything, including philosophy. So in order to appeal this fine, to say we shouldn't have to pay this, he first delivers a speech praising the virtue of Roman justice. So he says, Roman justice has so much virtue, it's so great. And, the Romans, they're like, yeah, wow, that's a really good speech. And the next day, he delivered a speech proving his first speech wrong and showing that Roman justice had no virtue. He was like, it's baseless, it's cruel, no one, there's no point to it. So the Romans were horrified by this display of rhetorical skill. They were horrified at the fact that he could deliver a really convincing speech praising Roman justice, and then a really convincing speech, attacking Roman justice. And also, they probably weren't too happy that he was attacking Roman justice. So the Romans, led by Cato the Elder, who you might know from history class, they're so horrified. They send the philosophers home, and they forbid the Roman youth from studying Greek philosophy. Unsurprisingly, because the Romans forbid their young men from studying Greek philosophy, guess what their young men did? Studied Greek philosophy. So Greek philosophy becomes incredibly popular after this. So by the time of Cicero in 106 BC, it was common for wealthy Romans to be taught by Greek tutors and learn Roman and Greek simultaneously. Cicero, who became known as Rome's greatest writer, this guy, used his knowledge of Greek to translate philosophical works into Latin, spreading Greek philosophy to a wide Roman audience. Also, on a side note, Cicero is partially responsible for the Renaissance many years later, like 1500 years later, because the translation of his letters leads to the revival of interest in Roman thought and then to Greek thought. So Cicero is an important guy in history. So the first Roman philosopher is Seneca, Stoic philosopher Seneca, who tutors, then advises Nero, the infamous Roman emperor. Seneca, although he teaches modesty and restraint, is accused of being a flatterer to a criminal, and he's also accused of worse, although it's hard to tell how seriously to take these accusations, because they are really serious accusations. However, it doesn't look great to be tutoring or especially advising Nero, who is most famous for fiddling while Rome burned. Again, it's hard to know how seriously to take that story, but the fact of the matter is, Nero has a terrible reputation. Someone advising him, also probably not a great reputation. However, this didn't stop the early Christians from loving Seneca. So there were forged letters between Paul, the Apostle Paul, and Seneca, which were highly prized by early Christian scholars. They were fake, but early Christians loved Seneca. Epictetus is the next Stoic Roman philosopher whose thoughts are spread by his student Arian, famous Roman writer and historian. And the final great Roman Stoic philosopher is Marcus Aurelius, who's an emperor of Rome. And by the way, if you guys have seen the movie Gladiator, that is Marcus Aurelius. So Marcus Aurelius led a difficult life, spending much of his time on military campaign against his will. And that seems to be why he was so attracted to Stoicism. His most famous book, Meditations, has a very unclear publication history, and it seems to be a series of personal notes to himself. However, it does end up being the best known introduction of Stoicism in the modern world. So, to sum up, Stoicism, unlike other philosophies we've seen previously, spreads quickly and widely across first Greece, then Rome, even those who would not be normally interested in philosophy. So let's see what Stoicism is. All right. Are you guys with me so far? Awesome. So, Stoic philosophy is primarily a lifestyle philosophy. So it primarily tells you how to live your life, right? But it has its roots in metaphysics, or theories about the world. So we're going to cover the metaphysics first and show how that tells you how to lead your life. So let's talk about the metaphysics first. So this is in terms of the logical basis here. Before we go in, just keep in mind the logical basis of this stuff is much weaker than, say, Socrates or even Aristotle, which is why I didn't cover it in How to Think. So if any of this seems weird to you or logically questionable, that's okay. It should seem weird or logically questionable. There's a reason why I didn't cover it until now. All right. So the Stoics saw the world as composed of matter, which is inert and lifeless, and God/fire/life force, which acts on everything and gives it qualities. So this is, the mind-matter distinction, but in a very strange way. So the fire part of this was taken more literally by early Stoics and more metaphorically by late ones. So the early Stoics believed that fire was present in every human being. The later Stoics were like, well, it's more metaphoric fire. So the result of this, though, is that the world is both unified by matter and it also has distinct objects. So again, it's like a different way of tackling the whole problem of unique objects versus categories of objects. This is a strange way of tackling it. So this life force also gives human beings thought and will. So along with making, say, something green, it also gives people thought and will. So you can think things, you can do things. So we have no choice about whether to receive impressions from the outside world. We actively consent to take these impressions as true. So part of our will is deciding what we believe is true or what we see or smell is true. So again, this is weird. Like, don't worry if this seems weird because it is weird. Like the same life force that causes plants to grow is this what causes us to want to do things. So just, it's weird, just this is what they believed. So, but because we can choose through our will what we believe as true based on what we see or what we smell, that means desires and impulses are a case of active consent to the impressions from the outside world. So I have a picture of a cute dog wanting a sandwich because that seemed better than a human wanting a sandwich. But if you think you want a sandwich, you think that you're hungry. But the Stoics say, no, you're wrong. You had the choice of being hungry. You had the choice of wanting a sandwich, and you chose to want a sandwich. So they say you can choose to want things, you can choose to not want things. You can choose to see things, you can choose to not see things. And this is going to be a very important part of their philosophy, is choosing to want things, choosing to accept things as true. So the wise, according to the Stoics, have a very different type of soul than a normal person. So the distinction between impression and consent to the impression is much more obvious to them. So and they use Socrates as their ultimate example of a wise man. And their idea, Socrates, dies before this started. So their idea is like, if you're a wise man, it's much more obvious to you that you're not hungry, that you choose to be hungry. So, and that ends up being really key to a lot of their claims, is they say wise men have a different experience than non-wise men. So if that seems questionable to you, that you can choose to be hungry or choose not to be hungry, the Stoics would tell you, well, that just means you're not a wise man. Once you become wiser, then you'll understand. So in terms of the world is determined in advance, but we can change our own actions through our moral character. So the world is determined, but your actions are not. So my natural response to this would be, well, if the world is determined, isn't our moral character determined? But they don't think that's a legitimate question. They're like, no, you can still choose to be good or bad. So the weird thing about this is if you choose to be good, then your actions will be good, and the life force will act through you. So on the other hand, if you're a bad guy, if you're an evil person, your life is also determined, but you don't choose to do evil things. Their actual metaphor is it's like a dog chained to a cart. So if this cart starts driving, the dog has to follow along with it. That's their metaphor for what it's like to be an evil person. You don't get a choice in what you do. So on a side note, the Stoics believe we periodically receive true impressions from the world. So not everything we see from the world is true. So for instance, sometimes we think we're hungry, or sometimes we see something and it's not true, but some of the things are. Some of the things actually represent what we see in the real world. So a wise man can tell which are the true impressions, and from there develop a system to have true knowledge about the world. So I think this is pretty interesting if you think about it as like a response to Descartes. So like, Descartes has this evil demon or evil genius who makes us think things that aren't true or believe things that aren't true. And the Stoics say, well, like that's only true for someone who's, not wise. For someone like, a wise Stoic, they would instantly be able to tell what's true and what's not true. So it's sort of like it's not a great response to Descartes, because of course that doesn't really help the rest of us who aren't so wise and who are hungry whether we want to be or not. But it is sort of like an interesting, strange response. Okay, so that's Stoic metaphysics. Are there any questions so far? Is it all clear so far? Yo, Wendy, ma. All right. All right, so I'm gonna keep going. So our behaviors certainly impact the world. Yeah. The world is just everything outside of us. All right, cool. So we'll talk a bit about wise men and normal people. But the Stoics, the very short answer is if you can develop yourself to become a wise man, but you have to be like within the Stoic philosophy. It's not just anyone who's educated. It's people who are very specifically educated by the Stoics. We'll talk about that more in a bit. We sort of have free will. So good men have free will in that they can choose to do good things. Evil men do not have free will. It's related to Socrates' ideas. It's not the same, but it's related. Remember, they take Socrates very seriously. So let's keep going. The Stoic ethics insist on the pursuit of virtue. So virtue is like, it's a bit hard to define, but it's what you'd expect. It's courage, it's prudence, it's justice, all like the big values, right? To a Stoic, pursuing virtue will lead to happiness, and that's a good thing. So it's a good thing to pursue virtue, and it'll also make you happy. So the only exception to the pursuit of virtue is we should also have things which are valueless, but are fitting for us, like good health and enough money to live on. So that's something else that's okay to pursue. Things, good health, enough money to live on. So naturally, we try to get what's fitting for us. We try to get good health, and we try to get enough money to live on. But a wise man realizes that we are all part of the same life force, so both other human beings and virtue are also fitting to us. So what's fit is identical to what's good, but only if you're a wise man. If you're a wise man, you realize that. If you're not a wise man, you don't realize that, and you think they're different. You think it's two different things, what's fitting for you and virtue. All right. So the goal of any man or woman is to be like a wise man and to realize that your natural impulse towards what is fitting for you is not the only thing that's actually fitting. So part of like the assenting to impressions things, part of like saying you realize you can choose what you believe is true about the world. That's part of this. Is a Stoic can choose to realize the truth about what is fitting. So a Stoic wise man, he realizes the truth about the world outside of him, and he realizes the truth about what's actually fitting. So once we do this, once we realize the truth about what's actually fitting, we become wise men. We realize we are fitting in with nature and with the rest of the life force. So we realize we're all part of one life force, all part of nature, and in some ways we found our proper place. So an interesting consequence of this is that wisdom, virtue, and happiness all go hand in hand. Happiness comes from wisdom, which is knowing that virtue is fitting. So that's why pursuit of virtue leads to happiness. Because you're wise enough to know that virtue is fitting. So also a nice side of this is that it means that all men are equal, because everyone's part of nature, everyone has the same chance to become wise. So it's actually very egalitarian. It's very equal for everyone, from slave to emperor. So before we go on to this creepy fellow, so yeah, there are no questions so far, right? All right, cool. So a lot of Stoic ethics comes from knowledge, right? Comes from knowledge, comes from wisdom, which gives us mastery over emotions. So these emotions, the way the Stoics define them, are appetite and fear, which when satisfied lead to pleasure or distress respectively. So you're hungry, you satisfy your appetite, you're happy, or it's pleasure. You're scared, you run away, you're distressed. So you consent to these emotions. You say, I agree that I am hungry. I agree that I am scared. I agree that I am lonely or whatever. And when you satisfy them, it means you've accepted the emotions as true statements about the world. So, given that the only true happiness is virtue, the only true unhappiness is being prevented from virtue, prevented from like pursuing virtue, that means most emotions are false. Most of the time you're happy, or you're sad, or you're scared. That means you've actually accepted a false statement about the world. And so this is why I have the mask salesman from Majora's Mask, because the scary mask and the happy mask. All right. So I think this should make sense so far. Is you're pursuing virtue. You're only accepting. You can choose to accept emotions as true or false, and the goal is to realize that virtue makes you happy, and that's the only true happiness. All right. So that's Stoicism in theory, but Stoicism at its core is a lifestyle. So it's useful to examine the most practical-minded thinker of Stoicism, Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor. He's not a great philosopher, but he is a guy who he accepts Stoicism, and for him, like it's something that's very real, because he has to accept it for his life, because he lives like a pretty crappy life for a Roman emperor. He just spends all his time at war and miserable. So his meditations constantly focus on the need to accept hardships as they come. Don't ask why they happen, just accept them and do not be pained by them. So he compares himself to a cliff, and he says, waves of hardship are always crashing upon me. So he's like, I'm just like, I'm a cliff in the ocean, waves of hardship are crashing upon me. I'll just stand tall and firm. So he tries to let go of his wants and only want what is virtuous. And it's actually, it's pretty sad. A lot of his wants are stuff like, I want to be home with my family, or I want to be like, in my own bed. And he berates himself a lot. And he says, I'm weak. I shouldn't want these things. I only want what's virtuous. I only want to be good. And he takes comfort in how everything is determined and how his life is just a speck in the grand scheme. So he tries to take comfort in the fact that everything's already determined. He's just like a sand on life's beach. He's a grain of sand on life's beach. So this is pretty depressing, in my opinion. Instead of being happy and being an individual, he's happy and being part of this grand thing that's already been determined. He's just a small part of it. So finally, he tries very hard to get himself to be tolerant among those who aren't as stoically wise as he is. For people who have different, points of view. And he constantly reminds himself they're part of the same life force, that they're all the same. So this is definitely a strange attitude for a man going out and leading an army against other men. But that is what he does. And this is a picture I thought was pretty representative. Obviously, this can't be an ancient Roman because this guy's carrying a rifle and this looks like some sort of tank. But you can imagine this guy's feeling the same way that Marcus Aurelius would have felt. Long military campaign, very, sad, depressing. All right. So, philosophy. Pursue virtue by choosing your own perception and emotions. You can become a wise man. So you need to pursue virtue, and you need to choose what you believe is true. You need, whether it's what you see or hear in the world, or how you feel. Stoics say you can control both. And we saw with Marcus Aurelius what that's like. You're constantly reminding yourself, you're berating yourself, you're like, I need to only want what is virtuous. So, if we're, is that all clear? Do you guys understand the philosophy? So it's not just, so it's not just hardship preparing an ordinary person for an extraordinary destiny. It's not something like that. It's a very, you're not being prepared for anything, you just accept it. So Marcus Aurelius, he's not saying this will make me better. He's saying I'm just a cliff. I am a cliff in the ocean. Waves are crashing upon me. That's what hardship is to him. So he's not expecting anything to come out of this hardship. He's just saying this is what's been determined. It's been determined that I will have this hardship. So, yeah, but it is like sort of a, I think a lot of popular like religions or philosophies often have the same, have similar ideas. So I mean, there's a reason why Stoicism was so popular, especially among soldiers. I think these are sort of, for anyone with a tough life, these are sort of universally popular ideas or ways, because it gives you ways to deal with your difficult life. All right, so let's talk about background philosophy and then take a break. All right. So, Stoicism can be seen as cynicism tempered by skepticism. So tempered here means strengthened by a mixture, like steel, tempered steel, right? So cynicism strengthened by skepticism, but it also evolved in response to other philosophies' contemporary needs over the course of its existence. Again, it has like an 800-year history, so there's a lot that goes on. But let's cover the basics: cynicism tempered by skepticism. So cynicism in English today means that believing that people are generally selfish and dishonest. So that's what cynicism means today if you read it in an English book. But the cynics, with a capital C, believed something different. So they were a philosophical group that wanted to live in tune with nature. So they did so by avoiding false influences and pursuing only virtues, which they believed led to true happiness. So they were trying to find true happiness, so they were avoiding anything that would be influencing them falsely, and they would pursue virtue. And they were ascetics, avoiding wealth and anything that comes from money. They were deliberately contemptuous towards society's norms. So no money, no houses, no nothing, and they would try very hard to show that society's way of making you happy was false. So there's a lot of really great and weird stories about the Cynics because of how they hate society's norms. So they don't believe in anything that society tells you is true or you should do. So the most famous Cynic, Diogenes, who we've talked about before, lived in a barrel and begged for his living. So, you know, this is like most famous, one of the most famous philosophers of Greece, lived in a barrel, begged for his living. So one story is he once met Alexander the Great, who asked him if there was anything that he could do for him. You know, Alexander the Great goes to find the greatest philosopher, or one of the greatest philosophers in Greece, finds him living in a barrel, and is like, well, you know, is there anything I can do for you? Because you're a great philosopher, you know, I'm a great emperor, and you seem to be living in a barrel. And Diogenes replied, yes, get out of my sun. You know, you're in the sunlight, leave. And so Alexander the Great supposedly said afterwards, if I could not be Alexander, I would like to be Diogenes. So that's one story. Next story about Diogenes the Cynic is supposedly Plato once defined a human being as a featherless creature on two legs. So Diogenes brought a plucked chicken to his school. So he took out all the feathers of a chicken and said, put him on Plato's desk and was like, behold, I have brought you a man. So then Plato had to change his definition of a man to being a featherless creature, two legs, and human nails. So they couldn't have talents. So the last story about Diogenes is supposedly he used to wander around the streets of Athens during daylight with a lamp. And he would, when people would ask him, you know, it's the middle of the day, why do you have a lamp? He would say, I'm looking for an honest man. So those are some of the stories about Diogenes, Diogenes the Cynic. All right. Okay. This is, by the way, asceticism here, this is just a general word for meaning people who avoid wealth and anything that comes from money. I'm not saying they're any part of asceticism as a philosophical branch. All right. Cool. So that's cynicism, though. So the important thing is they avoid wealth, they avoid money, they don't believe society knows what they're doing, and they pursue virtue. So on the other hand, we also have the skeptics. So skeptics with a capital S. So we're not quite sure what they believed, but their main belief was that nothing could be known for certain. So their foundation for this was that all knowledge depends on other knowledge, so that any proposition needs other propositions in order to be true. So it's sort of similar to what Descartes believed, except they don't have any solution. There's no I think, therefore I am. They just say, you know, nothing can ever be known for certain. And they actually appear in like Plato's dialogues and whatever, like criticizing the ideas of someone like Socrates or whatever. So that's their main belief. So no belief is ever truly believed, or you shouldn't ever truly believe something. You should only rely on something. So which is sort of like Popper, right? Sort of interesting how how philosophy develops like that. So Stoics get most of their moral virtues from the Cynics. They get the pursuit of virtue, they get the avoidance of false influences, they get living in tune with nature. But they're constantly being challenged by the skeptics, especially as they grow more and more popular. They get more and more challenges by the skeptics. So about the foundation of why you should pursue virtue, why you should avoid false influences. And this leads to Stoic metaphysics, and it also leads to their peculiar idea of truth. So their ethics become logically consistent because of the challenges of the skeptics. It makes their beliefs more solid and reinforces them, like steel reinforcing concrete, right? Which is what we have here. Okay, cool. So let's take a 5-minute break before we read some Stoicism. So I'll see you guys back here at 10:03. And meanwhile, yeah, you guys can get some water or use the restroom, or whatever. Also, any questions you have, put them in QQ chat, and once I come back, I'll answer them. All right, sounds good. See you back here at 10:03. Break. All right, I'm back. Still have a couple minutes. So the needing water isn't true. I appreciate that. Yeah, our human beings, free will, negative under nature. I don't entirely understand what you mean by that. Are you asking if we naturally want bad things, or yeah, you're gonna have to clarify that for me. Alright, any other questions, comments, concerns? What do you guys think about Stoicism so far? Do you like it? Think it's a good philosophy? Good way to live your life? Yeah, cool. Does it mean human beings have no free will? No. So remember, the Stoics think that if you are a wise man and if you are a good man, then you have free will. If you are not good, then you do not have free will. So it's sort of it's a complicated way of explaining free will. All right, it's 10:03. We appear to have lost some of our class, but I'm sure they'll come back to us soon. Let's begin again. Okay. Everyone can see my screen? All right. Cool. Good stuff. So last thing, let's look at how the Stoics argued. And we're going to look at that through the discourses of Epictetus. So Epictetus was born a slave in 55 AD. So his master allowed him to study Stoic philosophy. Once Epictetus was freed, he went to Rome to teach philosophy. And one of the more depressing things I've ever heard of, Epictetus was not his real name. Epictetus is the Greek word for acquired, or to buy something. And the reason why he was called Epictetus is because he was acquired by his master, or he was bought by his master. So it'd be like if you're, if they named a slave like bought or paid for or something like that. So Epictetus leads a rough life. After philosophy was banned from Rome in 93 AD, he founded a school in Greece. His most famous student there was a guy named Arian, who recorded Epictetus' philosophy in lecture notes. Only 4 of these 8 books survive, unfortunately. And it's very unclear, well, it's unknown how the discourses came to us today. Although we do know they first reappeared in the Middle Ages. We don't know how they got from, how they spent those 1,000 years, though, from 100 AD to the Middle Ages. And this is Epictetus, presumably an author's depiction of him. And so the section we'll be reading about is Epictetus talking about using the intellect to master ethics and emotions. So that's a key part of Stoicism. Using how to use your intellect to master ethics or emotions. So of all the intellectual abilities that we have, only one can tell us whether things are valuable or beautiful. The rational faculty, for this is the only faculty that we have received, which examines itself, what it is, what power it has, what is the value of this gift, and examines all other faculties. For what else is there which tells us that golden things are beautiful? They do not say so themselves. So it's by our rational faculty, so the way in which we think, the way in which we reason, what makes us self-conscious, that's the only way we can determine how things are valuable. So, like this gold duck with sparkles, if you think it's valuable, that's why, because of your ability to think and reason. So what's important here is by rational faculty, Epictetus seems to mean like critical thinking, which is a different mental process from seeing object. So he's not Kant. He doesn't believe in any pre-processing. There's nothing in your thinking that happens before you recognize the object. He's like, you see the object and you think about it. So it's very Stoic. All right. So Epictetus imagines Zeus talking to him and telling him to value his rational faculty. So, value his ability to think. So Zeus says, I have given you a small portion of us, the faculty of using the appearances of things. If you will take care of this faculty and consider it your only possession, you will never be hindered, never meet with impediments, you will not lament, you will not blame, you will not flatter any person. So Zeus, king of the gods, tells Epictetus, your rational faculty is divine. If you value it, if you consider it your only possession, the only thing you own, then you'll see everything clearly, and you'll never have any emotions to cloud the way you see things. And to illustrate this, I have a picture from the movie Hercules from Disney. So Zeus telling Epictetus, value your rational faculty to see everything clearly and without emotion. And so what I do find frustrating about this is Epictetus isn't quite as logical, or he doesn't start from the ground up. So he assumes that the rational faculty interprets appearances, but we're not given any reason to accept this. It's just like instantly assumed that that's true. However, if you do accept that the rational faculty interprets appearances, it sets up the argument, which you guys can probably predict based on what we've talked about so far. So we'll be virtuous if we use our rational faculty. So if we think about it, we think hard about it, that'll make us virtuous. All right. Are there any questions so far? All right. Cool. So, unfortunately, we don't value the rational faculty like we should. We have all these other considerations. So, but now, when it is in our power to look after one thing, to attach ourselves to it, we prefer to look after many things, to be bound to many things, to the body and to property, and to brother and to friend and to slave. Since then we are bound to many things, we are depressed by them and dragged down. So even though we should only look after the rational faculty, we feel compelled to look after our body, or our property, our family, our friends, and all of this drags us down. It's sort of a depressing thought. Because we care about our friends and our brothers, and our body and our property. That's what's dragging us down. That's the chain around our ankle. We should really just be devoted to critical thinking. So Stoic philosophy can be very, very difficult like this. It seems very, very tough. So critical thinking gives us power over all, and we should accept that control and use it. So through critical thinking, through our rational faculty, this is what gives us power. We need to accept that. I must die. Must I then die lamenting? I must be put in chains. Must I then also lament? I must go into exile. Does any man then hinder me from going with smiles and cheerfulness and contentment? You may fetter my leg, but my will not even Zeus himself can overpower. So this is a very famous quote. This is one of the most famous quotes from Stoicism. Even though he has to die, or he might have to be put in chains, or he might have to be kicked out of his country, he never has to feel a certain way. He never has to be sad. He can always have smiles. He can always be cheerful and contentment. He says, you can always fetter my leg. You can always do this to my legs, put them in chains. But you can't fetter my will. You can't put my will in chains. So this is Stoicism. This is why it's so appealing. There are inevitabilities in life, and there are things that can't be escaped. But our attitude towards them, our will, is always free. So this is interesting. He never talks about the ability to use the will to avoid being put in chains. He only talks about the ability to use the will to feel a certain way about your chains. So I feel like it's very much appropriate philosophy for someone who lacks freedom, like a slave, for instance. You can imagine Epictetus as a slave thinking this. Yes, you can put me in chains, but you can't put my will in chains. All right. So through study, we can adopt this attitude of not caring about misfortunes. So this it is to have studied what a man ought to study, to have made desire, aversion, free from hindrance, and free from all that a man would avoid. I must die. If now I am ready to die. If after a short time I now dine because it is the dinner hour, after this I will then die. How? Like a man who gives up what belongs to another. So if you studied what you had to study, if you studied what you should study, you have no desire and you have no aversion. You don't want anything and you don't not want anything. You're ready to die at any time. It doesn't affect your life that you're ready to die. So it's like I have this picture here, found from the internet. I thought it was pretty cool. Same idea, this young woman greeting death. She's ready to die. It hasn't affected her life. So in a Stoic sense, we are free from desire. We are free from aversion. We can recognize what's true. So, and death here is sort of like the paradigm, or the paragon of what men tend to avoid. It's like the ultimate example. What men tend to avoid is death. So the Stoic accepts death calmly. So this is sort of inspirational, and it's very much a soldier's code, right? Like, again, you can think of someone like Marcus Aurelius living with death every day, thinking, I'm ready to die. If it's now, okay. If it's later, okay. I don't care. All right. So man is attracted only to rational things and pained only by irrational things. So to hang yourself is not intolerable. When then you have the opinion that is rational, you go and hang yourself. In short, if we observe, we shall find that the animal man is pained by nothing so much as by that which is irrational, and on the contrary, attracted to nothing so much as to that which is rational. So if it's rational to kill yourself, if through your critical thinking, if through your rational faculty, you come to the conclusion to kill yourself, then you should kill yourself. What really pains you is what's irrational, what you haven't come to through your critical thinking. And on the other hand, what really, helps you is what you've come to through your critical thinking. So what's clear from this is suicide for Epictetus is a rational choice. It's made by someone who believes suicide is the right thing to do. And he uses this as evidence for the idea that we are okay doing things we believe are rational or the right thing to do. So I think this is a controversial statement, and I think millions of dieters would like to disagree with him, that we're okay doing whatever is most rational and not okay doing whatever is irrational. Because of course, if you've ever been on a diet, you're much happier doing what you know is bad for you, eating a slice of cake, than what is good for you, eating an apple. But Epictetus would disagree with this. All right. Sophie, I can't answer that. Only you can answer that through realizing what is true. All right. So intellectual discipline teaches us what is rational in our day-to-day life, but we must make these decisions for ourselves. So if you're reluctant to do dirty work, so let's say you have to clean out a bathroom or something like that, something dirty. You say, but this would not be worthy of you. And Epictetus answers you, well, then it is you who must introduce this consideration into the inquiry, not I. For it is you who know yourself, how much you are worth to yourself, and at what price you sell yourself, for men sell themselves at various prices. So he says, I'll teach you to analyze what's appropriate for you, but you have to figure out for yourself what's appropriate for you. He says, I'm just giving you a tool. You need to use it. So I don't know about this. He's definitely told us what to do before. And so now he's telling us, oh wait, never mind. Like now it's up to you to choose. I don't think he's being quite serious about this. I think Epictetus really wants to just say, well, just do the work. But instead, he's saying, nope, you have to decide for yourself. How much are you worth, and at what price do you sell yourself? So once we know what's appropriate for us, we must be careful when we act upon it. Only consider at which price you sell your own will, if for no other reason, at least for this, that you sell it not for a small sum. But that which is great and superior perhaps belongs to Socrates, and such as are like him. What then? Since I am naturally dull, shall I for this reason take no pains? I hope not. So you should only sell your will, you should only sell your ability to choose for a high price. Even if we aren't as important as Socrates, we still need to value our freedom. So, Socrates, he's the greatest Stoic sage. So it makes sense that for Epictetus, that for, a former slave, you have to consider very carefully before selling your ability to choose. You have to consider very carefully before finding a job. Because that's really, that's a very important, momentous decision for anyone, but especially for someone who's spent his entire life, not being able to choose what he spends his time on. A slave can tell you, don't sell your will for a small sum. So the only proper measurement of how much we've achieved with our intellectual discipline is our mastery over our desires and aversions. Nothing else matters. Epictetus imagines that he asks you if you understand Stoicism. You say yes, you've read and understood the books. So, Epictetus is asking you again, and he says, do you understand Stoicism? And you say, yes, yeah, I read all of it, I understood it. Maybe you say, I listened to Trevor's lecture on it. Here's what Epictetus would say. He'd say, I reply, slave, I am not inquiring about this, but how you exercise pursuit and avoidance, desire and aversion, how you design and purpose and prepare yourself, whether conformably to nature or not. If conformably, give me evidence of it, and I will say that you are making progress. But if not conformably, be gone. Not only expound your books, but write such books yourself. What will you gain by it? So he says, I don't care if you've read the books. I don't care if you've listened to the lectures. Really, what it matters is not being able to recite it, but being able to live the tenets of Stoicism, being able to live as a Stoic. There's no point to Stoicism otherwise. So this emphasis on living Stoicism, rather than just knowing Stoicism, obviously makes it really different from the philosophy we've covered before. And we'll see a similar emphasis on the importance of action much later when we go to existentialism. We won't see it with all ethical philosophy. We won't see it with, everyone who tells you how to live. But it is sort of a very unique change. They say don't just read the books. We don't really care if you read the books. We only care if you live the lifestyle. So Epictetus doesn't have much patience for skeptics who would poke holes in his philosophy. He imagines himself talking to a skeptic. Do you comprehend that you are awake? I do not, the man replies. For I do not even comprehend when in my sleep I imagine that I am awake. Does this appearance then not differ from the other? Not at all, he replies. Shall I still argue with this man? And what fire or what iron shall I apply to him to make him feel that he is deadened? He does perceive, but he pretends that he does not. He's even worse than a dead man. So Epictetus is like, imagine I'm arguing with someone, and he uses the same argument as Descartes, and he says, I can't tell when I'm sleeping or when I'm awake. And Epictetus is like, should I really still argue with him after that? Should I try to light him on fire and prove to him that he's really awake right now? He's like, he does perceive, he does see the world, he knows he's awake. He's pretending he's not. So he's worthless. He's worse than dead. He's totally worthless to talk to. So I think the important thing here is Epictetus would hate Descartes. So we should live our life being grateful to God because he makes the world appropriate to us. If God had made colors, but had not made the faculty of seeing them, what would have been their use? None at all. On the other hand, if he had made the faculty of vision, but had not made objects such as to fall under the faculty, what in that case also would have been the use of it? None at all. So God made colors so we could appreciate them. He made vision so we could appreciate colors. So both would have been useless without God, so we should appreciate our ability to perceive colors. So that's another part, is now we're being grateful to God. So by the way, this turns into an argument by design, proof of God. I skipped over it here, but I think you guys can see how it would go. You know, he's like, the world is so perfectly designed as for human beings. That means that God must exist. Not super interesting. We've covered it better with Aquinas, so skip over it for now. And finally, God has given us the power of rational faculty, so we must use it because that's the only way for us to reach our proper ending. So, in those animals then whose constitution is adapted only to use alone is enough. But an animal, man, which has also the power of understanding the use, unless there be the due exercise of the understanding, will never obtain his proper end. So because we are given the power to understand, we have to understand in order to become a Stoic sage. Animals aren't given the powers to understand, so they don't need to. The reason why we have to is because we can't. So I don't really know if Epictetus meant to imply that animals are more advanced than humans who aren't sages, who aren't wise men. I don't think that's what Epictetus meant, but like it's definitely implied here. But anyways, so this concludes the discourses. So Epictetus, he argues with these statements. They're logically consistent, not proven. He has no patience for those who would cleverly disagree with them. He's like, these are what I say. You shouldn't ask for proof of them. Don't try to be clever and disagree. Accept them. All right. Conclusion. So, as you can tell from Epictetus' discourses, there's definitely a reason why Stoicism is so popular. It's inspirational and well written, even if it's frustrating that he sees no need to defend it in a rigorous manner. So many warriors and politicians during Greek and Roman times, and as now, found comfort in Stoic philosophy. In a world where what happens to you seems beyond your control, it's comforting to focus on your own attitude as a means of freedom. So you can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you feel about it. So for next time, we're going to abandon this soft lifestyle ethics for a more rigorous ethical treatment in the hands of Kant, which should be fun, at least be more interesting, more for us really to grapple with. All right, cool. So because we have a fair amount of time, it's only 10:30. What I'm gonna do is go over the homework, so and cover how to be answering that in an effort to encourage you guys to do the homework. While I'm pulling that up, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the QQ chat about Stoicism. obviously, or about anything else. All right, sound good? All right, good stuff. So while I'm pulling this up, any questions about what we've covered, especially about Epictetus? All right, cool. So in that case, let's go over the homework. All right, so I've pulled it up on Reddit. So everyone can read this fine? Yes? All right. Other people? Yeah, good. All right. So Russell says that Hume finished a corner of philosophy. What does Russell mean by that? Well, so if you guys are going to answer this, first things first, if I'm not sure what Russell meant by that, I would go back and in History of Western Philosophy, go back in Russell and look, where does he say that he finished a corner of philosophy? And so you should find it in the section on Hume in the introduction. And so you can read what Russell thinks, and then you put it in your own words, right? So this one's pretty straightforward. Just means that Hume finished his corner of philosophy, comprehensive critique of induction, nothing that could be done after Hume. All right. So the process there makes sense, right? You go into the book, see what Russell says, translate what he says directly. Ni men min balama. You guys understand what I'm saying? Yes? Maybe? No? All right, so we've got not sure. So Russell says that Hume finished a corner of philosophy. All right, so I look at this question, never seen it before, and I'm like, huh, what would that mean? So I go down and I find, History of Western Philosophy. Go find what page Hume is using the index. Sorry about this. One sec. All right. So page 235 looks like. That was 659. All right. All right, so here we have Hume. So he represents, in a certain sense, a dead end. In his direction, it is impossible to go further. All right. So we have an idea now of what this means. This is a pretty close idea to finishing a corner of philosophy. We could also look for the direct words, and we say, okay, what does it mean to be a dead end? Well, it's to refute him has been a favorite pastime among metaphysicians, so none of their refutations are convincing. Okay, so we understand it's his critique, what they try to refute it is impossible. So we get towards the end. All right. So we get our conclusion here, right? Hume has proved that pure empiricism is not a sufficient basis for science. So that's the conclusion. Induction is an independent logical principle. So now we can answer this. We know what Russell meant. Okay. You guys get what I'm saying now? Does this make sense now? All right. Cool. So it's not like crazy difficult. It's not, rocket science. And again, like we say, Diogenes the Cynic solves Zeno's paradox of how to walk 10 meters by standing up and walking 10 meters. So if you don't remember what that is, you have to look up what is Zeno's paradox of walking 10 meters. And we find the problem is, how do you start and how do you conclude, because 10 meters is infinitely divisible. So then how would Diogenes solve Hume's problem of induction? Now you have to connect the two. So Diogenes the Cynic's solution to Zeno's paradox was a simple solution, right? He didn't worry about the logic, he just did it. So in terms of problem induction, he would just perform induction, right? That would be his solution. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. Is for those of you who didn't answer the homework, is anyone, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but can anyone tell me why you guys haven't been doing it? Is it just like a time thing? Like, are you guys busy? Are you guys not understanding how to answer it? Like, what's going on? So, yeah. So this seems reasonably clear. I don't feel like, well, what's going on? If anyone who hasn't been able to do the homework yet, why not? Should I be explaining the homework after I assign it? Should I be like explaining how to do it or time? Okay. So perfectionist sort of issue. But an imperfect answer is better than no answer at all, right? And anyone else? Is there anyone who wants me to like explain the homework after I assign it? Explain it more, explain the right answers? Is there anyone who cares about that? Because I really do want you guys to be doing the homework. Like it really does, it really will make a big difference in terms of your comprehension and in terms of what you ultimately get out of this course. So I do think it's like an important, it's like an important thing, right? You know, I'm trying not to assign it just to be a sadist. Like, you know. All right. Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Yeah. Because I'm not just assigning it because it like makes me, you know, happy to be like, haha, I'm making all these people do homework. I'm taking time out of their day. Like, you know, it's not some evil plan. Like I really do want you guys to like learn and engage with the material. And the only way you can like really engage with it is if you write about it, which forces you to think about it. But yeah, I know you guys are busy. But okay, cool. Well, all right. So that's enough of me lecturing. If there is anyone who wants me to explain the homework or anything, let me know. All right. I suppose the last thing we'll do. Again, I didn't plan out the timing very well on this one. I think I thought that John was going to be doing this. Okay, so feedback on the homework. So feedback I can do through Reddit. It's much more difficult for me to do feedback on QQ because well, I'd have to like email you individually. Like, you want general feedback on how you've been doing on all the homeworks? I could do that, I guess. All right. So yeah. So if you guys want feedback on the homework, post it on Reddit, and I will try to give you feedback because I do understand that that's a real issue. Yeah. All right. So last thing we'll do is go over. So this is, or you guys should be able to see the homework for today. So just quickly, in terms of how we'll approach this, how did Stoic metaphysics lead to Stoic ethics? That's pretty clear. That's literally based on the lecture, right? Socrates was the hero of the Stoics. Do you think you would have agreed with their ideas? So in order to do that, you have to think about our conclusions about Socrates, what he believed, right? What he, yeah. So our conclusions about what he believed, how he argued, and then it'll give you some sense of if he would have agreed with their ideas or not. And then this one is just an easy question. Would it have an impact on the way you live your life? Just think of something, answer it. All right, cool. So that's it for today. So in terms of homework, if you want feedback, post on Reddit, or I guess you guys, there must be some sort of function through QQ, so you guys can message me directly. So if you can do something like that, I'm also happy to look at it there. I also post answers on Reddit for the homework generally, although I missed one or two. So if you guys want to see the right answers, go look at that. And so yeah, that's it. All right. So again, do homework. Next week, Kant. Yeah, good. All right. Thank you very much. And that's that. All right, cool. So if anyone has any questions, I'll be sticking around. And all right, sounds good, Jenny. I'll try to do that. Seems fair. All right, bye-bye. Any questions? As always, philosophy courses during college? Yes, I did. I wasn't a huge fan of the way philosophy was taught at Princeton. I actually don't. I've tried to structure this in a different way because I think if you enter like a philosophy course in college now, they tend to be sort of there's like this weird thing where they try very hard to be like physics. I think like there's very much like this weird science envy. So a lot of what you cover ends up being like an attempt to like make it relevant in a strange way. So yeah, I did do philosophy during college, but I've tried to structure this course in a different way to make it better for you guys, better for me, so you have more to take away from it. Also, practically speaking, in college, you would have to do a lot more reading, and then in the class would be more discussing the reading. All right. If you have native emotion, so like the Stoics say how to control the emotion is really just like a natural, innate process. Like it's not like it's not something you accept. It's more you choose to say whether or not it's true. So like you're hungry, you're like, I choose to be hungry right now. I choose not to be hungry. So when you look at Marcus Aurelius, he talks about that, like he's constantly trying to choose what he believes is true. Choose to believe whether he's happy or unhappy, like choose to want to be with his son, with his family, not choose to want to be with his son or his family. So the answer, I guess, to how to control it is struggle, pretty much. Hard work. That's what the Stoics believe. I don't agree with them, but that's what the Stoics would answer. All right, cool. Good question. Yeah. All right. 再见。